Welcome to Blue Line Lore. I'm your host, Cobalt Blue. You can just call me Cobalt. I invite you to join me as I conduct interviews, analyze data, and dissect media on a variety of topics concerning American law enforcement and the ever-evolving society that we are tasked to defend. My hope is that thoughtful, earnest discussion of these topics will better equip us all to form a more perfect union within these great United States of America. Settle in as I delve into the past, present, and possible future of American law enforcement. These are the Chronicles of Blue Line Lore. Welcome viewers and listeners to the pilot episode of the Chronicles of Blue Line Lore. I am, of course, your fictional host, Cobalt Blue, here to discuss the very real issues faced by America's first responders. I'd like to extend a tremendous thank you to my first guest, one talented Stephanie Power. Stephanie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Co-op Blue. My name is Stephanie Power. I am a licensed mental health counselor associate and fourth-year doctoral student of counseling psychology up here in Washington State, and I'm really excited to be here with you today.
We are so excited to have you, and Washington, beautiful place, by the way. Most of our team is up in the Pacific Northwest, and we love it. You won't find a greener place on earth.
Upper left USA, gotta love it. It's beautiful and green. It's spring right now, so it's a really nice place to be right now. Yeah, I've been in Washington State my whole life, born and bred. I am getting ready to relocate, though, to Texas for my internship, so I'll get to call northern Texas home for about a year, and then I'll come back to Washington State to do my postdoc, and all my friends and family live here, so it'll be a nice change of pace to be in Texas for a little while, but I'll look forward to coming back home to the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely. Although Texas is great, too. To be clear, I love every state in the USA, the Lone Star State included, but I'll confess that I'll always be partial to the PNW. If it's all right with you, I'd like to go ahead and get right into this, because I'm just so curious, and I think a lot of people listening probably want to know. Can you describe your current research to include what research questions you hope to answer and how you hope to go about answering them?
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful that that was a way that I got to connect with you all and come on your podcast, was to share my dissertation research focus area that I'm currently working on. We're in the analytic and writing stage of that project. It's part of the requirements to graduate with my doctorate in counseling psychology. And I wanted to focus on law enforcement as my population, and specifically the potential impact that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training has on law enforcement officers' mental health. So we're going to be looking at the impact that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has on anxiety, depression, perceived stress, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And then we're also going to look at a little bit of how does participation in Jiu-Jitsu impact treatment-seeking behaviors at all, as well as frequency, if that has any impact on decreasing severity levels of anxiety, depression, perceived stress, and PTSD symptoms.
That is tremendously exciting for, I'm sure, most people listening. There are a lot of police officers, of course, with a genuine interest in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, wrestling, the big three, as it were, and martial arts in general. So that being said, where will our viewers and listeners be able to find the results of your research once it's complete?
Yeah, so once I complete my analysis and write my final chapters, I will defend that within my academic organization, and then it'll be published online in public forums. I'm also on social media at Almost Dr. Power, all spelled out, and I will share those results there. I've had the privilege to connect with lots of great organizations and police departments and agencies across the United States, as well as internationally. So I will be distributing results to those folks as well, who requested specific information or have made some interest in actually having me come and speak to their department or at one of their conferences to share the details of what we found.
Tremendous news, Stephanie. Honestly, hearing all that, that's very exciting. Will your research also be available on JSTOR, EBSCO, and other academic databases?
Yep, it'll be on EBSCOhost for sure, and then dissertation archives around, and then I will Probably plan on doing some sort of formal publishing for the dissemination purposes of the requirement for my program. So not 100% sure where I'm gonna try to reach out to get that actually published officially. So it will be an actual research article that's available through the public as well. So I'll be sure to connect and give you that information once that happens. But it will be on EDSCO for sure.
Thank you very much for that. And also, on behalf of law enforcement across the country, I want to thank you yet again for considering our well-being on your academic journey. What inspired you to pursue this research for your doctorate?
I've always been someone who just really felt a calling to help the helpers. I can think of back when I was in early elementary school, and I remember just being so devastated when the Oklahoma City bombings happened and seeing that on the news and all the first responders who were involved in trying to make those rescues. And my mom saw how moved I was, and I said, Mom, I have to help them. I have to help the helpers. And we actually baked dog biscuits to send to the canine units who were trying to recover individuals and do rescues. And we also made cookies for the first responders. So I've always had a heart for this community, and it just so happened that the stars aligned. And I met my husband on a dating app, and he's a police officer now. When I met him, he was in corrections. So there's a wonderful crossover between my personal and professional interests. So I've always had a heart for this community. I got to work with some couples through a research study that I was on during my second year project, and also just my interest as a law enforcement spouse and supporting this community that protects us. So it's a great meld of professional and personal passion.
For those of you listening who are old enough to remember the Oklahoma City bombing, before 9/11, that was probably the big terrorist attack that had happened in this country.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was quite an event. And then, like you said, 9/11 after that, right? That was another big event, and finding places to support those folks has been really important. And now I get to do that every day in my counseling work and through this research. So I really wanted to support folks where they're at, especially the law enforcement community, right? There's been lots of research on prevalence rates of mental health issues, and also about barriers to treatment and stigma and all of those challenges. And I really wanted to approach it from what are they doing right now, what is being helpful, where can we come alongside and support them. And there was no existing literature or research on jiu-jitsu, but I know lots of law enforcement officers and military veterans and other first responders who are on the mats and rolling and doing jiu-jitsu. So I thought, let's meet them where they're at. Let's see if what they're doing is as beneficial as we think that it is, and let's get some official data out there to support what we think we know.
Absolutely. And and as we'll talk about in a couple questions down the line in this interview, there are, of course, some members of law enforcement who are a bit cynical of academic research, and like I said, we'll talk about that. But I think this is one of those instances where common sense can be confirmed by academia, and sometimes that's kind of important to do, in my experience, and certainly in yours as well.
Yeah, for sure. We can always have anecdotal evidence and think we know things, but when we have the empirical peer-reviewed evidence to come alongside, it's really a driving force for just solidifying why we do what we do, what's helpful, and what we're doing actually doing what we think it is, and if it is, how can we do more of it to have more of those benefits. So it's a great melding when we get to come together and put those pieces together for hopefully everyone's benefit.
Indeed it is. What is the process for getting a doctoral dissertation approved in your program, and what was your experience like in going through that approval process?
It's a pretty rigorous process. They don't just let you work with human subjects just because you want to. There's something called the IRB review, which makes sure that your study is fit for human use. So I had to fill out lots of paperwork, share all the ins and outs of my analytic strategy, how I was going to recruit participants, who was I trying to recruit, from where, what was I going to say to them, what questions was I going to ask. And Really, all in all, the main purpose of the IRB is to make sure that there is no harm done to participants. And with law enforcement specifically, I really wanted to make sure that there was absolutely no deception involved. We really want to build strength and trust in bridging that gap between academia and various agencies. And so they ensure that there's no deception, that there's no harm done to participants, that we're mitigating any kind of risk. And if there is any risk for adverse responses for participating in the study, that there are resources available for those individuals if they do have any of that. And then another really core component that the IRB looks at that was a big tenet in my research itself was protecting confidentiality and making sure that there was clear language and description that, all of this information that's collected is confidential. It won't be tied back to you, so that there was hopefully a little bit more engagement and support in the participants. And I'm so grateful for the process because we really had a great response for folks who did participate because I went through that IRB review process to get that approved to make sure it was, fit for human subjects.
Understood. Just out of curiosity, what was your methodology in your collection? Was it all in-person interviews? Was it online surveys? How was the data collected?
Yeah, it was all collected through a online collection program called Qualtrics. And so we created the back end, and then it was sent through a link and a QR code. And so all the data was online. There was no in-person interviews. My methodology is quantitative, so surveys only, no interviews. And I'm proud to report, again, share that we had 505 participants. I actually, when you go to submit your IRB proposal, you have to say how many people you are going to have it open to and at what point you're going to close it once we've met this criteria, right? For analytic strategy, you need to have enough respondents to get either generalization or a high enough power to say, my results mean what they mean because I had enough participants. And I thought, 500 sounds like a pretty large number. I had done a second year project, which was just based off of Washington State law enforcement and just looking at prevalence rates. So just giving a handful of standard scales to look at things like sleep and anxiety and depression and PTSD, as well as alcohol consumption. And I fought tooth and nail to get, my 70 or so participants for that one. And that was also confidential. So for this, my dissertation one, I was like, 500 seems like a really high number. I'm not sure if I'll reach it. And then I'll say that I'll close it come, say, I think I put on there like April 1st or something like that. So we would have just passed it. And we had 505 respondents within about 6 weeks of the survey being open. Wow. So I actually had to close it to participants. So it's actually not even open anymore.
Wow, I was going to offer to post a link in the description, but I guess that's no longer necessary.
Yeah, no, thank you for offering that. I was blown away by the traction. It's kind of got picked up by some agencies and individuals and even some companies, and it really just took off. I have 505 participants total, including participants from 47 states and 7 countries, 8 including the United States.
Stellar. That's incredible. Is it all right to ask, I know you said you're still set to defend your dissertation. Can you disclose any of the results at this time, or is that still under wraps?
I can say that preliminary results do show there is some significant findings in some of the data that we collected. So we will be reporting those officially as soon as I've defended, and I'm hoping to do that, within the next month or so. But we do have some significant findings, which is incredible to report.
Incredible indeed. And as some of our more erudite listeners can confirm, we in academics love our statistical significance.
Yep, it's always a bummer if we don't find anything significant, but even when we don't find something significant, it is still telling us something. But my research questions were looking at, does jiu-jitsu, decrease anxiety symptomology? Does it decrease depressive symptoms? And preliminary, we're finding significance. We're seeing that jiu-jitsu has an impact, and how incredible that this is the first study of its kind that is looking at what we think we know anecdotally already. So I'm very excited to defend and disseminate and just get that into the hands of everybody who participated, everybody who already engages in jiu-jitsu, and other folks have worked really hard to kind of pave the way for officer well-being, because we're seeing, preliminary that this participation does have an impact. So that was pretty awesome to see.
Yes, it is. As I said, we love our statistical significance. Out of curiosity, though, what does the day-to-day schedule of a student in the field of psychology look like?
Yeah, right now for me, I'm currently at pre-internship. And so in our program, we have 3 different segments of clinical training in addition to our coursework. So I do have a course load. So I do go to classes in the evenings, and then during the week, I am at my second clinical training placement. So I see clients in person for counseling services 3 days a week, and then I also do psychological testing the other 2 days of the week. And I work with about 2/3 of my current caseload are first responders or couples where one or both members are first responders, and then various other types of presentations for my individuals who I see for therapy that are therapy clients. I am in what's called a PsyD program. So the difference between a PsyD and a PhD is that this is counseling psychology instead of clinical psychology. So we have more of an emphasis on the therapy relationship and providing therapy services and psychological services, as opposed to a more research-bound tract, which you would see in a traditional PhD. And so for the PsyD program, it's still Doctor of Psychology, just the initials are PSYD at the end instead of PhD.
Was a master's degree required for your program, and is that typical of psychology PsyD programs in the United States, to your knowledge?
So for my program, I just had to have a bachelor's of psychology or equivalent to join the doctoral program for the PsyD. The PsyD is a 5-year program, and at the end of year 2, we have accumulated enough credits to get what's called a master's en route. So I received my master's in the program that I'm in. So it wasn't 2 separate sets of programs that I had to do. And then once you complete your first semester of practicum or your actual clinical experience where we're working with clients, then you meet the requirements to license that master's. So that's where I get those credentials for the licensed mental health counselor associate, which I will not use once I graduate with my PsyD, because that's a different license altogether. So I did get my master's en route during this 5-year program.
That is incredibly efficient. Do you know if that's fairly typical for PsyD programs in the United States, or do you think it might depend?
I think it depends. I also think it depends on if you do a PhD tract or a PsyD tract, and every school is going to be a little bit different. But I do know in the Washington area, the PsyD programs in our area do provide a master's en route. So you don't have to go bachelor's, master's, and then PsyD. You will get it on the way.
Something to think about for those of you listening who might be considering a PsyD program. Speaking of your PsyD program, you have worked in couples therapy before, as we talked about before this interview. Did you do any conflict resolution while working in that field?
Yeah, I have lots of experience with working with couples. It wasn't anything that I even was like, hey, this is really what I want to do. I just had a wonderful opportunity to participate in a pilot program for couples and got my first exposure. And one of my couples that I worked with there was a first responder couple. And so I really grew to enjoy the dynamic of working with 2 individuals and how they're showing up in the space. And so lots of what we do in couples work is conflict resolution and communication, and how are we creating space to really understand our partner, because really, in my experience, what I've noticed that leads to a lot of conflict is just feeling unheard or unseen and not understood. And so if we can help facilitate those conversations with providing skills and tools, then conflict is still gonna happen. We're still gonna have differences, but the way that we go about it, the approach that we have, is a lot more effective in getting our needs met and really getting to know and understand our partner better.
Absolutely true. And shoot, with that much conflict resolution, as your husband has probably joked with you before, you're halfway to being a first responder yourself.
Yeah, I'm grateful that he does feel comfortable to share with me what he does, and he's got a really tough job, and those skills, those conflict resolution skills, look a little different in the field for him than they do with me in the therapy space.
Of
But
course.
all of it is beneficial, and there's lots of crossover. I learn from him all the time, and he learns from me, and it's a really great melding of these two fields, and how it really is about creating space for people to de-escalate, to regulate themselves, to come to conflict resolution.
Are there dynamics in relationships that you find are more common among, say, two police officers or two firefighters, two military folk versus two people who may not be in any of those career fields or just have one person in there?
I think it really varies person to person. We
Okay.
have this concept called constructivism, right? Which says that each individual gets to assign their own meaning to things. And that's really unique to that individual. So even when I have, say, two folks who are in law enforcement or two firefighters, and they're either, sometimes they're at the same house, sometimes they're at different houses. It really is individualized to the way they conceptualize the world, their own views on things like meta emotions or metacognitions, right? How we feel about feelings or how we think about thinking. I think that generalizing isn't the most helpful for things. I do see some generalizable tendencies that come into those spaces, right? Mainly to do with ideas about therapy and confidentiality and safe spaces, and is there any repercussions. So I see that pretty much across the board. But as far as presentations of how individuals show up, it really is a unique dance. And in couples, that's what we call it. We call it a dance. Everyone has their own dance steps, and that's going to be unique to them. And then how that melds with their partner is very different. So I do see some generalizable things, but really try to see what each individual is showing up with, rather. And how can I support the couple in meeting each other where they're at, so that everyone gets better heard and understood and seen.
Sage advice that this channel is going to do our best to press on with the mission you just described, just to understand and listen to each other as individuals. But moving from dancing to rolling, if I may, do you personally
Yeah.
practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or any other martial art?
Yeah, so I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on a sparse basis. As we talked, my schedule is pretty challenging, but I've been practicing for just over 2 years. And I try to make it, once or twice a week. And some days that's easier to do than others. Sometimes I've gone stints without going for several weeks, but I love that I can always come back no matter how long the time has been, and I'm always learning something new. So I do practice as often as able, and it's been the hardest and most challenging and rewarding sport and physical activity I've ever participated in, for sure.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite takedown?
Oh gosh, anyone that I'm not the one being taken down.
I suspect that's a popular takedown.
Yep, absolutely.
As far as human anatomy goes, I'm partial to the ankle pick myself, particularly when striking is not allowed. It's very difficult to punish. I mean, if they can punish a double leg by sprawling on you, it's really hard to respond to an ankle pick with another attack. It works a little different for me, as the viewers will see over time, but as far as humans, or humanoids, I should say, definitely partial to the ankle pick myself.
Very effective. I would agree.
Once your doctorate and postdoc work are both completed, what future projects would you like to lead, if any?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think I've been in school for 8 years. And so we keep thinking at the end of the rainbow when we get there. And what do I want to be when I grow up? And, to be honest, when I walked into even the first day of the study program, I thought I was going to be doing one thing. And that has gradually evolved and changed over time. And so I think what I would like to see, what I would like to be doing at the end of internship and postdoc is just deepening my level of curiosity, just continually learning and unlearning, right? Because that's part of the process as well.
Very
And
true.
just being obedient in taking opportunities and not being afraid to fail and challenging myself to whatever opportunities present itself. If I were to say this is where I would be right now, 5, 6, 7 years ago, sitting here talking to you, sharing this incredible dissertation and research focus on law enforcement and jiu-jitsu with, on this podcast with you all, I couldn't have imagined it. So I hope that my curiosity is still as abundant as ever and that I'm still saying yes to new and uncomfortable and exciting opportunities. I really hope to be still doing individual work. I have a passion for this community of public safety and first responders. I really enjoy getting into spaces and providing tools and workshops and speaking with individuals, giving practical skills and tools. So I hope to be doing more of that, and then doing some of the deeper level work in the therapy space as well.
It sounds like you have more of a preference for therapy and other hands-on projects than research itself. Would that be a fair characterization?
Absolutely. So I've really enjoyed the research that I've done so far, and I do have ideas of how I'd like to expand in it. When I first launched the study, I got a lot of folks from the veteran community as well as dispatchers and EMTs and even coroners and crime scene investigators asking if they could participate in the study because maybe they trained jujitsu and they want to share their experience and how it's impacted them and changed their life. So I do have a little bit on my heart to replicate this study and open it up to a broader population. Maybe that's active military or retired military or veterans, and see if what we found for law enforcement is true for these other groups. So I might continue with that. I also will continue with my therapy work and hopefully some speaking engagements and share, what we found and other skills and tools as they're developed, getting them in the hands of individuals to support, officer well-being and other first responders.
Wonderful to-do list that you have set up for yourself, Stephanie. And of course, if you decide to replicate that study, we do hope you'll come by and speak to me again in the future. That'd be great.
I'd love to share. I'd love to get more voices represented in these different communities because while there is lots of similarities across these different groups, there are lots of differences. And so it would be really great to have that empirical evidence for military or frontline healthcare workers or, other agencies and groups who are also participating in jiu-jitsu.
On the subject of academic research and these different communities we're talking about now, how do you see academic research better synergizing with frontline law enforcement moving forward? We both understand that it's a very necessary marriage, and I'll talk about that more in future videos. But it has been a historically rocky matrimony. So, as a subject matter expert in couples therapy, particularly in the company of a cartoon robot, how would you see to bettering this relationship?
I think the biggest difference is emic versus etic, right? Are we looking at this from a deficit problem? Are we doing research because we want to find out what's wrong with a population? What are they doing from a negative standpoint, or where are their shortcomings? And I don't know about you, but when I receive criticism or people are trying to look at my flaws, I'm like, ooh, you know, okay, I'm open to some feedback, but that also it doesn't create a very congruent partnership or marriage like you mentioned. And I think what made my study so successful was I wasn't trying to find what law enforcement officers were doing wrong, or how high prevalence rates, or how much they were struggling with different symptoms. I wanted to find out what they were doing already that was benefiting them. What are you doing that's providing proactive protective factors, right? Where how can I, as a budding psychologist and researcher, how can I meet you where you're at so you can tell me what you think works for you? That is what made this so successful, because I think it helped people feel included, and I wasn't trying to point out any wrongdoings or anything like that, but like, hey, you do this thing. I have suspicions that, we think that this is beneficial, not for you just as defensive tactics or doing your job well and having good outcomes, but I think this is benefiting your overall well-being. So I think that this marriage can be really beneficial when the parties involved are considered and brought into the fold instead of being on the outside, right? I think that's what I would do. I would want to approach it from a strengths-based approach rather than a deficit. That's not to say that, when we have areas that we struggle in, those need to be addressed, and we can't address them if we don't fully understand them.
Of course.
But there is a large existing body of research. We know that policing is stressful. We know there's organizational stressors. We know that there's detriment to cardiovascular health. Like we know these things. We know there's increased rates of depression, anxiety, substance use, high rates of divorce, interpersonal problems. Like we know this. This has been researched. What do we do with that information, and where can we meet people with where we're at? And this kind of collaborative approach and integrative approach, I think, could be really helpful in melding and increasing the success of that marriage, if you will.
Absolutely no notes on that answer, Stephanie. I'm going to be thinking about that as I approach interviews moving forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Are there any other topics you'd like to circle back to?
I think we did a pretty good job. What are your thoughts?
I think you did an excellent job, and I was just listening. Are there any final comments or anything you'd like to ask me personally?
I'm just excited to, see how this page develops. And I have this phrase in therapy that I try to encourage all of my clients, and it's curiouser and curiouser, which is actually from Alice in Wonderland. And the ability for perspective and self-reflection and growth that we can have when we're curious in two dimensions. Number one is curious about other people, being curious about how are they showing up, what are their thoughts, how do they feel about things, and what's their world like, and then curious about self. How am I showing up? What am I learning about myself? What do I need to unlearn? And just curiosity in general of leaning into things rather than snap judgments or quick criticisms and automated kind of thinking. And so I really appreciate, your curiousness about this study and about this melding of the world of psychology and law enforcement and first responders, and how can we be curious about one another to have good things come of that. So I'm just really grateful for, the opportunity to share some of my passion and this melding of these two topics, and how that's kind of shaped where I'm at currently in my career, and getting to share that with you and your listeners. And, hopefully some folks can take away from this that there are a lot of people on your team. There are so many clinicians in psychology and mental health services and social workers and all of those folks in my career field who really have such a genuine respect and care and desire to support you all, not from a deficit lens, but from where you're at. How can I come alongside you and really help you grow in the areas you would like to, or just hold space for you with the things that you've experienced? And I'm just grateful to get to share that with all of your listeners, and hopefully they realize, there's people who want to be on your team, and we're out there and we're ready.
I appreciate that so much, Stephanie. I will say that there are probably a lot of law enforcement, whether they're listening or not, who may not feel that way. I may not think that is the case at this time. It's whether it's right or wrong, that is the perception, and that is perception that
Yeah.
I hope to break through on this channel over time. As I said, it means a lot to me, believe it or not. I've had some experience in law enforcement myself, and so do a lot of people who said they wanted to tune in and listen to what I had to say, or rather what you had to say in this case. Stephanie, I want to thank you very much for being here, but I also want to thank you for sharing your insight that went far beyond the script that we covered. I will be sending you a copy of this once it's edited, along with my post-interview thoughts, which of course I'm going to present to you before anyone else sees it. Thank you so much for your time, Stephanie, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and contribute to the hopefully the wonderful success of this channel and its mission.
I thanked soon-to-be Dr. Stephanie Power for her time and her insights. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to set a precedent for ruminating at the end of each interview. I must say that the quote from Alice in Wonderland, "Curiouser and curiouser," has really stuck with me since recording this conversation. The context which Stephanie provided made it difficult not to, especially with recent real-world events as a backdrop. Curiosity about people, places, or concepts that we don't understand can often be the first step to understanding them, even if they're not entirely relatable to us. Indeed, curiosity intuitively leads to understanding, and understanding usually begets empathy. Empathy can do so much to maintain peace, obviously, but it's even more useful when de-escalating conflict both on duty and in our precious interpersonal relationships. To paraphrase what the doctoral student said, conflict will eventually happen no matter what, but our approach to conflicts will inform whether or not everyone involved can eventually get their needs met despite that fact. Hopefully, a little curiosity can lead to understanding, then understanding to empathy, and the latter then inform our approach to interpersonal conflict a little more often. If there's any takeaway from this video beyond the existence of a study that measures the mental health benefits of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for law enforcement, let it be that one. Empathy, as I say in the channel trailer, will always come first on this channel's agenda. That trailer was written and recorded weeks before I spoke with Stephanie, but the parallels between this channel's mission statement and her insistence on meeting people and communities where they're at are uncanny. Thus, her emphasis on curiosity had such a strong staying power for me that I included the word in the channel trailer description. Thanks for that, Stephanie. For those of you in the audience who wear uniforms for a living, I hope you all got some insight into the perspective and professional experience of an academic who proudly helps the helpers and backs the blue. I know that for a lot of us, it can feel like we have few people who understand our point of view, much less empathize with us, outside of other first responders and some military personnel. Stephanie's reminder that so many people support us, including folks in her rightfully esteemed career field, really did mean the world to me. I hope it meant something to those of you out there listening too. Now, this is Blue Line lore, so most of my interviewees will either be sworn peace officers or supporting staff thereof. I think it's important that the voices of law enforcement are put into focus as the shape of law enforcement evolves in a post-2020 world. And first-hand experience, as of late, has taught me that some folks who really push for police reform are still interested in hearing our individual perspectives these days. I'd like to make our insights available, for those willing to hear us out, through these pre-recorded interviews. But that door, as some of you say in this era, swings both ways. So, I think hosting the occasional guest who has never personally worked in law enforcement can also offer us some insights worth hearing out, whether they're the type who back the blue or not. In fact, in my next video, I will be reviewing a film that is skeptical of the institution of law enforcement, to put it mildly. But it makes a point to validate peace officers as people and acknowledge us all as unique individuals every bit as much as Stephanie did in her interview with me. I am, of course, talking about Netflix's Nimona, and I hope you'll tune in to see why I genuinely recommend it for the whole family, in spite of a few small critiques. Speaking of critiques, however, I'd like to circle back to this interview, because I have two criticisms for myself as an interviewer. One thing I lacked in this interview was any kind of pushback. Granted, it's my first interview, and I sincerely agreed with virtually everything my guest said anyway. But there was still one missed opportunity for good faith pushback. Specifically, I should have asked what safeguards were in place to account for deception or trolls in her online survey. I know that studies like this always plan for that possibility, but I'm curious how this particular project went about doing so. In the future, I'll try to challenge every guest at least once in this way, although my focus will still be more on understanding my guest than correcting them. Oh, and Stephanie, if you want to contact our team with an answer to this question, I'll post and pin a comment with your response. My other negative self-evaluation is the lack of opportunities that I presented for Stephanie to express her individuality outside of her professional work and motivation. For example, I kind of put her on the spot when I asked her what her favorite takedown was. When she didn't have an answer offhand, I could have followed up by asking for, say, her favorite sweep or submission. That would have given my guest a better opportunity for self-expression. Similarly, when she quoted Alice in Wonderland, I neglected to follow up with additional conversation about literary fiction. Still, I am happy to have been given an opportunity to speak with this guest. I'll post her Instagram handle in the description if any agencies listening want to contact Stephanie Power about her research. Thank you all so much for watching. I humbly invite you all to drop in for my Nimona review in the first video of the Legends of Blue Line Lore. See you then.